Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the review and recap series for the Living Under Nazi Rule OCR B history topic. Today we are looking at Germany at war between 1939 and 1942. So we're looking at Germany's experience in World War II in the first sort of half of the war. Now, World War II officially begins with the German invasion of Poland on the 1st of September 1939. And almost immediately, Germany has to set up what is known as a war economy, so a couple of months later in December 1939. And this means that all industries within Germany must support the war effort. And that meant that military expenditure rose. The amount of money that was spent on military and the amount of things that were produced for the military rose. So from 1939, 23% of goods in factories were to do with the military. However, 2 years later, in 1941, because of this war economy and this concerted effort to improve military production, 47% of goods in factories were to do with the military 2 years later. By 1941, 55% of the German workforce were in war-related work. But despite these improvements and this more concerted effort, production continued to struggle. For example, the number of aircraft had only risen by 2,000 between 1939 and 1941. And that's because the German war economy during these years lacked efficiency. The factories weren't very efficient at producing high-quality military goods very quickly, and they lacked central control. They lacked a direction for them to go in. So something needed to change. And that something was the person in charge of the war economy. Albert Speer was appointed in February 1942 of the Minister of Armaments and War Production. And his job was basically to improve the factory output in order to help Germany try and do better in the war or win the war. So what did Albert Speer do? Well, he decided that he was going to give factories independence, but also centrally control them through something called the Central Planning Board. And this was very successful. And some of the reasons that this was successful was because of the changes he brought in alongside this Central Planning Board. So what did he do? For example, he made factories focus on single products rather than making lots of different products. Factories would now only make one product to do with the war, which meant that they became more efficient. He brought in more women to work in the factories because of the labour shortage with men going off to fight in the war. He also increasingly used concentration camp workers in war factories to improve output. And he also excluded skilled workers from military service. One of the big problems that the German war economy faces is that lots of its skilled workers, those trained engineers and factory workers, were being forced to join up to the German Wehrmacht, the German army, which meant that there was a lack of skilled workers left in the factories, which in turn reduced factory output. However, this war economy didn't come without its downsides, and it was particularly hard on the population of Germany in terms of shortages and hardships that it caused. Rationing was introduced on food, clothes, shoes and coal because there simply wasn't enough of these to go around. And there was a very complex system that went with this rationing system. So it was based on points. It was a point system based on your age and occupation. So if you were a young male factory worker who was out at work all day, you were more likely to have more rations than somebody perhaps in another category, because the German government believed that you were more worthy and more necessary to the German economy. It did help feed those that were poorest or those that were struggling throughout the war, but there were very long queues to get your rations, and the quality of the food and items that were rationed was drastically reduced. Some of the poorest, interestingly, though, were better off because of the ration system. If before 1939 you were unable to afford any food, the ration system at least meant that everybody got a little of something rather than went completely without. It's also important noting that the Jewish population suffered more greatly than any other particular group in Germany during the ration system. They had a different ration book compared to the rest of the non-Jewish population in Germany, and they were often only allowed into the ration shops about 20 minutes before they were due to close. So by that time, most of the highest quality goods had already been taken earlier in the day. The role of women changed significantly during 1939 to 1942. Interestingly, unlike in Britain, women were not conscripted into factories. This means that they were not forced to join up. But the Nazis did try and encourage this increasingly throughout the war. So in 1939, there were 760,000 women in work, but 1.5 million by 1941. Now, this is obviously an improvement on the number of women in factories, but when you compare it to the fact that there was actually an overall population of about 30 million women in Germany at the time, this is still an extremely low number. Restrictions on marriage loans were lifted because don't forget, you could not get a marriage loan if you had a job as a newly married woman. However, they removed that restriction because they want women to continue to have children, but they also need them in the workplace. And from 1939, women aged under 25 had to complete 6 months labour service. So that's the start of kind of almost like a conscription style thing. To encourage women to take up jobs that are going to help Germany win the war. Another significant part of Germany's experience during the war was the bombing and evacuation program. From the spring of 1940, the Allies began a bombing campaign, a relentless bombing campaign, and cities were raided 3 to 4 nights a week. It was continuous bombing of key German cities. And as a result, in September 1940, the child evacuation program began. Okay, and you can see the German word for it there. I'm not even going to have a go at pronouncing that, but that's the proper name for the German evacuation program. What was the features of this evacuation program? Well, children below the age of 14 stayed 6 months in a rural area where they would theoretically be safer because there were less key targets that the Allies were going to bomb, just like it was in Britain. Children below 10 were allowed with their mothers, so they could stay in a rural place with their mothers. However, older children above the ages of 14 were sent to Hitler youth camps. Now, at the Hitler youth camps, the conditions were very strict. They were run by members of the SA or the SS, and these camps were used as another way to indoctrinate children. Okay, we know about the Hitler youth camps from the previous videos, the kind of activities that they would get up to. And this was a further way that the Nazi government could indoctrinate the young people of Germany. And as a result of this, many parents chose to not send their children to Hitler youth camps. And this is perhaps best exemplified in the fact that in Berlin, out of 260,000 children eligible for the Hitler youth camps, only 40,000 went. Okay, so lots of children chose not to go. That, in a nutshell, is Germany at war between 1939 and 42. The war economy leads to lots of changes to the lives of workers, to the lives of average people with shortages and hardships, and to the lives of women as well. Okay, and the bombing and evacuation campaign also has a very significant impact on the lives of German people. The relentless bombing, which we're going to talk about in the next episode, did lead to drops in morale because obviously their surroundings, their communities are being destroyed. And the evacuation program as well also was rather unsuccessful. As ever then, I've got a series of questions that I would like you to test yourself on. I'm going to put these up on the screen now. What I would like you to do is pause the video here, please, and then in a couple of seconds' time, I'm going to put up the answers to these. So have a test, see what you can remember, and then repeat this until you get them right. Okay? Thank you very much for watching.